Okay, I'm going to start letting people in. We actually had a lot of people sign up today.
Oh, wow.
Hi, everybody. Jeff, we were just talking about you to Stephen.
Hi, Joy.
Stephen.
Hey.
Hi, Joy.
Hello, Mom.
Hi, Peter.
Hi,
Hey,
Jeff.
Rebecca, how's the foot doing?
It's doing a little bit better. I should be healed by this weekend. Thanks for asking, Jeff.
Hi, Karen. Hi, Maria.
Hi,
Hi,
everyone.
Lupe. No, that's
Lupe
hi,
should
Juan. Is Lupe on here too?
Hello.
not yet.
My landlady is
Hi,
here.
Maria.
Kirsty.
Oh, that's so sweet. Hi, Christy. Thanks for joining us.
Wait, who's Christy?
That's my landlady.
That's so great.
But I'm very interested.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
Wonderful.
Nice
Hi.
to see you. Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you guys.
Love it.
Great. Well, I'll go ahead and get started and add people as they come in. Feel free to use the chat. We have a lot of new faces. So I love it. I'll share my screen. Hold on one sec. A couple Zoom rules for those of you who are new. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. We recommend speaker view for presentation. Video sharing is optional, though we love to see all your smiling faces. Please type all questions and comments into the chat. Please be active in the chat. We love getting this feedback, real-time feedback while our guest speaker is speaking. And you can type any questions that we will have a Q&A at the end for about 10-15 minutes where you can ask any question you like. You can unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat and I can read it for you if you have any questions or comments. So please feel free to be engaged. A quick update from Autism Tree. We do a weekly update. We have been doing these lunch and learns. This is our 80th lunch and learn this week. I'm so excited. It's a new milestone. I can't believe it. We started doing these once the pandemic first hit San Diego and all the schools closed. We just wanted to keep our community connected and inspired every week to keep going together and support each other. We have 79 lunch and learns uploaded on our YouTube and they're recorded. Please feel free. There's a whole playlist of them to go check it out. And we have amazing guest speakers over these past 80 weeks. We have now reached over 680,000 people across all of our social media channels. We have all the social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. My lovely interns help me run those each day. Since January of 2022, at the beginning of this year, we've already coordinated 72 family events. And we have 57 coming up between now and the end of this year, though we all also constantly add new events every single week, every month, to keep our families out in the community. We are doing in-person events now. We have 5 programs in person and 19 programs are still going on virtually on Zoom as well. So people even outside of San Diego County can join in to all of our program events. We have now posted, we have 454 videos on our YouTube channel. Subscribe today if you haven't. Hello to everybody who at home who's watching at home in the future. We've posted 393 of those videos from our YouTube channel on since March 12th of 2020. And that's all an influx of our volunteers and our program directors and our amazing parents who have submitted videos to us that we've shared across all of our social media channels, just to keep that family feeling even online. So thanks to everyone who's uploaded one of those videos to us. A special thank you to our Lunch and Learn sponsor, CalAble. They are a savings and investment state program. If your disability happened before the age of 26, you are eligible to open a CalAble account. You can learn more at this link. They have a few videos that we actually played last week. If you want to go back and we had a CalAble speaker last week. They have just launched their Cal Ambassador program where they feature parents of people with autism and how they have used the CalAble account to kind of change their lives, which is really amazing. So these are quick 1-minute videos. We can show them. You can go back and watch them. They're available on their CalAble YouTube channel as well. And then I'll also send a recap email with all of the links to CalAble as well. If you're more curious about it and want to find out more, that will go out to everyone who's registered for this, and as well as our whole network at Autism Tree. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Dana Hoff, our Executive Director, and she will introduce our guest speaker today.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here with you and just to share this milestone. Some of you have done Lunch and Learns that are on here with us right now. And I just want to reaffirm that we use these Lunch and Learns all the time as resources in our community with our families. It's turned out to be such a blessing. And, you know, just to share on a personal note about our speaker, Stefan Tran, what a just blast it was to spend time with his mother recently, who's on here. Shout out to you, Joyce, for doing an incredible job with your son who's speaking today. He just shines so bright in a room full of very prominent people at Neurocrine. I would say there was 20 people in the room when we met Stefan and we were introducing ourselves, and he started speaking about his connection with autism with his brother Peter. And I literally was kind of bouncing out of my seat, to be honest, and flagging down Rebecca saying we needed to meet him. And it just was everything about how we do Autism Tree, the heart connection that drives us, was all speeds ahead when I was listening to Stefan at Neurocrine introduce himself, talk about his brother first and then his research. And, you know, our research, we have a pre-call with the speaker every time. And we were just talking about the neuroscience conference and how important it is. And, you know, Autism Tree, when we turned 10 in 2013, the first thing we did after our Party Like a Rock Star event at Hard Rock Hotel was hire our first full-time employee. And that was Lisa Kaufman that we had for 12 years. And the first thing I did with her is I said, I want to work on a neuroscience conference. And that is when we went to Bella Vista, and where the Stanford Consortium for Regenerative Medicine is. And we met, you know, everyone who is involved in the conference, which is Dr. Allison Motry, Roger Bingham, and, you know, the list goes on. But it's just so exciting to me that next year it'll be 10 years, 2023, that we've been putting forth this effort into this conference, with the whole point of it all being a heart connection between incredible researchers and the families that we serve. And so to have, you know, Stefan on here today to talk about his incredible groundbreaking research that he's doing at the Salk, but also to share first about his brother. And shout out to you, Peter. I'm so happy that you're here, and that your family is fully remarkable in their, not just their love for you, but their just mind blown by how incredibly talented you are and how much you bring to your family. I cannot believe that you got into UCLA twice, and that I'm seeing so much in the media about the typing community, you know, graduating from Berkeley, graduating from UCLA. It's wonderful to see Otto Lana, who has been with Autism Tree since he was diagnosed with autism. Now he's 16, and I know you guys are friends. He's really been taking Autism Tree as a community and trying to make us more aware of all that goes on in the typer world. And started, you know, long ago, having a typers group in our office at Autism Tree pre-pandemic. And it's just remarkable to me how much more awareness we have here, even at Autism Tree, but just in the media globally. And I'm, again, so happy to have Stephen on here with your family to talk about this, because it seems to be something that everyone is realizing is incredibly important to make more opportunities happen. Oh, shout out. Is Otto on here, Joyce?
I don't think so.
Okay, we're gonna have to tell him that you shouted out to him. but no, just, no, our neuroscience conference that we're having this year is going to be on Friday, November 11th. It's going to be a hybrid. And I think it's just kind of a great tee off to have Stefan Tran on here talking about the research that he is doing. And I just want to give you a huge warm welcome to you and your whole family and everyone else. And just say what a blessing it is that we have such brilliant minds right here in our community doing groundbreaking work.
Love it. And also, before we forget, here's some pictures of Stephen and his brother, Peter.
Oh, love it. Can you put those back up, Rebecca?
Oh, yeah.
And then we'll let Stephen, you have the floor, Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen, you have the floor. Feel free to say anything you want.
Okay, no, thank you. Wow, what an introduction. Most people I go in contact with, probably I will meet once and then we'll forget about about what sort of research we do. So that's quite an introduction compared to the normal day-to-day things, and great pictures. So I created a slideshow for this. So let me go ahead and do that. So today I thought I'd talk about some of the research I do, or at least I'm involved with tangentially. It has to do with the subtyping question problem with autism. And I want to lay out sort of what progress has been made and where we can go with this, and what sort of implications it's going to have for the future of therapeutics and clinical practice with different subgroups of people who have autism. Right now, this is an audience that already knows all this, so I can quickly go through it. Autism is classified as mild, moderate, and severe, which are very broad categories. And it's essentially dependent on the overall impairment that we get from batteries such as ADOS or ADIR in 3 core areas: language, social acuity, and stereotypical and repetitive behaviors. On the actual spectrum, as we all know, the sort of exact challenges everyone faces can quite vary from individual to individuals, and the degree to which they experience these challenges has incredible diversity within the autism community. So I just listed a couple of other conditions that people with autism experience, such as obsessive compulsive disorders, anxiety, movement disorders, anxiety. Some of them even have seizures. And this is a rally that different people will experience these to different degrees, and in different, some people don't have seizures, for example, some people don't have movement disorders, and some others do. Nevertheless, the subtyping question has been difficult because it's challenging in order to create a meaningful definition of what is a subtype, besides the obvious scale of moderate, severe, and mild. So current neuromolecular research has kind of lumped all individuals across the spectrum together. And the ideal has been to try to find shared convergent biology amongst the entire umbrella of autism in general. And I had to give it its due credit because there have been some great biological findings using this practice. One general phenomenon that is consistently found, I'll show with this sort of toy graph here, is when they look at brain activity in certain synaptic and neurotransmitter pathways, you'll maybe have a couple of patients. I'm just showing 5, but there'll usually be dozens of patients in any given study. They'll compare them to a neurotypical comparison cohort, and what they'll find consistently is certain synaptic and neurotransmitter pathways are less active or downregulated, as we call it, compared to the neurotypical group. And this sort of finding has led us to more understand other phenomena in autism, such as why is there a male to female skew in terms of number? Why is there a 4-to-1 skew in ratio? Donna Werling, who I had the pleasure of meeting at UC San Francisco when I visited there, does a lot of work in this field. And what she did is compared just generally males and female brain chemistry and gene expression. And she actually found that there's certain pathways, particularly certain synaptic pathways, for which males generally have lower expression in the pathway than females in general. And intriguingly, the same pathway is the one that you find downregulated amongst autism individuals. And so that would suggest here that part of the skew can be attributed to the fact that males are more susceptible to the downregulation since their expression is already at a lower level than females. So again, the practice of lumping individuals with autism across the spectrum altogether to try to uncover biological insights has been very fruitful for the past decade. So what sort of trajectories in terms of therapeutics does this create? Well, let's go back to the example of some of those synaptic pathways that we found downregulated. What you can do is you can look at the protein network that's attributable to that pathway. So on the left is a protein network of some of the core genes that are involved, such as the SCN2 gene, NRX1, and some other ones. So a given therapeutic strategy would be, given that so many individuals share this downregulation of this pathway, we can try to target a couple of key genes that are hubs in the pathway and try to increase them so that overall, if you do that, you activate the whole pathway. And then what you might get is that the overall level of the pathway can be raised back up to neurotypical levels. And so this is sort of an all-in-one approach. The idea that we might be able to create a therapeutic that's broadly applicable across the spectrum that could help target some of the core etiology that has gone awry. Just to be more concrete, for example, let's take seizures as an example. We know that the gene SCN2A, when it's disrupted, patients with that mutation do have seizures as a major phenotype. So let's say that we do a drug that boosts the level of SCN2A. Well, the idea is you might be able to fix the seizure problem. However, SCN2A is involved with more pathways than just seizures. It's also involved with pathways involved with learning and memory. And so the downside of an approach like this would be that even if you alleviate the seizures, you might have collateral side effects, such as you might end up disrupting learning and memory. And we know this from anyone who deals with psychiatric drugs. They maybe are meant to deal with one symptom, but it ends up causing collateral other symptoms, such as diabetes or loss of sleep or some other stuff. Cancer is another good example where there is an all-in-one drug, that'd be chemotherapy. That's kind of meant to, it basically works for every single type of cancer, but no one really wants to get chemotherapy because besides killing the cancer cells, it also greatly damages your healthy cells and really hurts the patient. Takes a long time to recover, and often, sometimes it causes irreparable damage in some areas, such as if it's a brain tumor. The other problem with the sort of lumping individuals as an all-in-one category is it creates a sort of prevailing attitude of one-fits-all pathways to success mentalities, which is really problematic. And I can give some pretty obvious examples where that's not a good idea. So let's look at some subtypes of autism we do know exist, such as Asperger's. Asperger's is commonly known for their difficulties in navigating social environments and interpersonal relationships. So for a person with Asperger's or an Asperger-like autism, they would probably benefit the most from programs or help in understanding the dynamics and mechanics of interpersonal relationships and social environments, which can be very complex, admittedly. Take a different group, such as the one my brother's in, and Otto, who was referred to earlier, nonverbal typers. A lot of them have actually quite good awareness of the social environment, but what they are unable to do is to talk, so they're nonverbal. And so what they really need are highly trained facilitators to support their typing motions. And then based on the latest stats from Autism Speaks, 31% of autism cases are reported to have some form of intellectual disability. And so for that type of issue, you would have to have the proper learning accommodations for impaired cognitive skills. So these are all different subtypes that would not benefit at all from similar programs. Someone with Asperger's syndrome does not need help learning to type because they can just talk. Someone who's a nonverbal typer doesn't need necessarily to be learning first grade material when they're in fourth grade because they actually don't have any impaired cognition. And you can see how this all becomes problematic when schools are trying to lump all neurodiverse kids into single programs. So the mind shift that I want to propose is that instead of considering autism as a single disease that has diverse symptoms in it, we actually consider autism a constellation of multiple distinct neurodevelopmental diseases that just happen to share some common deficits that we call autism. So each of these individuals, instead of saying that they're all have autism, instead we'll call them all different diseases, like disease A through disease B and C. And then they just happen to share across the diseases some common phenotypes. For example, disease A and disease B, maybe they share social anxiety. Disease C and D share seizures, and disease E and F share movement disorders. So what evidence do I have that this could be useful, or that this is even this is real, a real way of conceptualizing autism? It's actually come from the genetic studies of the past 10 years, which I'll quickly go over. So in the past 10 years, we've had an explosion of genetic studies, particularly whole genome sequencing with special cohorts. And so the Simmons Foundation has done a fantastic job of collecting cohorts of thousands of patients and families that have that are of a specific architecture. So this is an example of a family that they've collected in which there's a mother and father, and then there's children. Their families would have single children that have autism, and now the other children would have. So this would be a case called a proband or a simplex case rather than a multiplex case. And with whole genome sequencing, you can sequence the mother and father's genome, and then also the proband, and you can look for differences. And so when there's specific genetic variants that the proband has that neither the mother or father have, that's called a de novo mutation. And you can find which genes have de novo mutations. So just as an example, this proband, let's say, has a de novo mutation gene A. So what these studies looked at is thousands of patients or thousands of families. And so if you look across families, say like family 2 and family 3, in family 2, maybe their proband has mutations in gene B. But where we get excited is when you find another family where their proband has a mutation in the same gene as another family. So we call that a recurrent mutation. And part of the development of genomics in the past 10 years has been really sophisticated statistical methods, which can look and say whether this recurrence of certain mutations in genes is significant. That is it happening by chance, or is this is not likely to happen by chance? So if that's the case, it's probably causal. This mutation of this gene is probably causing autism, that is. And so based on these studies, which again, were from thousands of patients, we currently have published 102 genes that if you get damaging mutations, it's probably causing autism, which we know. And though not published, that same foundation, the Simmons Foundation, has been continuing to collect more and more samples. And now the list is close to 150 at this point, though it hasn't been officially peer reviewed. So with that discovery, then this sort of enables, I think, a very tractable approach to subclassification of autism. So what I would basically propose is we have the autism spectrum, and you start at the bottom. So you start at the individual gene level, in which we say at the leaves here of this tree, you have gene A all the way through gene P here. And each one of these genes defines a distinct disorder, a completely unique genetic disorder, equivalent to like Down syndrome or Fragile X syndrome. And what you want to do first is study each of these on its own level, individually. So you want to get together all the patients that have the same genetic deficit and see phenotypically, what do they all have in common? Which education things work for all of them, and so on and so forth. And of course, in parallel, the researchers would also want to study the molecular functions of each gene, particularly as it relates to neurodevelopment, such as in the brain. So each gene could be hundreds of pages of description of sort of characterizing them. But for simplicity, let's just look at some pretty quantifiable disorder traits. So let's say, for example, people with gene C, we find they're nonverbal, have regular IQ, socially cognizant, they have some movement disorders, anxiety, and seizures. That would be one group. Then let's take a look at gene D. Let's say we find they're all also nonverbal, they have regular IQ, they're socially cognizant, have movement disorders, anxiety, essentially the same as gene C. The difference is they don't have seizures. And then we can go on. So let's just look at gene H, for example, and we find that it's quite different from gene C and D. These ones are verbal, they also have regular IQ, but they're socially impaired in some way. They have no movement disorders and no seizures, but they do have anxiety as well. So that would be the base. You want to start out with something like that. And then what you want to do is create something called a hierarchical subclass. So this is more of an abstract concept because it's not defined by a single gene. Rather, what you're doing is you're taking genes that are really common, genes that are more similar to each other, and you're taking the intersection of that and defining that as sort of like an abstract hierarchical subclass. So for example, gene C and D, which we saw were very similar, are all nonverbal, have regular IQ, socially cognizant, have movement disorders, anxiety. The difference is for this hierarchical class, we don't define them as having seizures or not. And you could do that for the different subgroups as well. And then of course you could create super hierarchical subclasses, which you take the middle abstract ones and you find what's common between them and you keep going. So basically at the top of the tree, you'd probably end up with the three classes of mild, severe, and moderate. Whereas at the bottom, you have much more elaborated symptoms associated with each genetic deficit. So basically, the current state of autism research is to go from the top and then try to find meaningful sort of abstract classes that are hard to define, whereas I'm going from the bottom and define the subclasses based on commonalities from things that we do tractably know exist. So if you were to do this, you would be able to get benefits immediately from that. So for example, let's say, because this is a real problem, you're able to get a lot of individuals that have gene C as a disorder, but you're not able to find too many people that have gene D. So let's say it was only gene C that was well characterized, but gene D hasn't been well characterized. Well, what you could do is you could look at the fundamental biology relating between gene C and D in the brain, and you could look at how much they interact or share similar pathways. So what this is another protein interaction network that shows as any line that connects shows that these two sort of nodes, which are genes, intersect. And so you might find that gene C and D share similar pathways because they have a lot of connections, but gene F doesn't. Well, if they share a lot of connections, they probably fall in the same pathways and have similar functional roles. And what that would mean on the biological level is individuals with gene C and D have more similar biology that's been gone awry than, let's say, people with gene F. From an educational standpoint, what that would mean is if a person with gene D came up who you have no idea what to do, like what educational routes work for them, but for people with gene C that has been well trod out, you might recommend to the families with gene D to try out the programs that gene C have already found work for them. It might be a better starting point. It'd certainly be a better starting point than going from the top of the tree and asking, oh, does this person have mild, severe, or moderate autism, and going from there. That seems less fruitful to me than going from the bottom. bottom-up research, like I'm proposing, would also facilitate pharmaceutical development. So biotech companies, unfortunately, they're not too interested in finding drugs for single gene deficits when the population is small, which would probably be the case for autism, where the number of individuals you find with any given genetic deficit is pretty low. Rather, they're more interested in having drugs that are for a sort of like larger population. But that's fine for when we have a hierarchical tree like this, because what you can do is you can group individuals that share some sort of similarity in one or more deficits, and you can look at you could try to find a drug that addresses what's the common deficit that these groups share. For example, you could focus on the population, the subpopulation that consists of gene C, D, E, and F, in which we can see that they're basically nonverbal. They just share some movement disorders and anxiety. But this might be a big enough subpopulation that a biopharmaceutical company could focus on looking for drugs that specifically address these movement disorders that are shared amongst this subpopulation. And it could be arbitrary. The company could decide, how big or large a population you want to focus on. You could look at a larger population that consists of genes C, D, E, F, G, and H, and you could focus on what they share. In this case, it's just anxiety. So it's important to note that from these genetic studies, we found that only 1% of people, like amongst the whole spectrum of autism, only 1% actually have single gene mutations, or at least you can attribute their autism to a single causal genetic aberration. The reality is that 99 or more % of autism can't be explained by this. So it's either multiple mutations across multiple genes or has a very unclear genetic etiology. So the question might be, why are you focusing on just the 1% instead of the 99%? And I would say the 1% is a tractable way to start defining subgroups that would benefit the remainder 99%. So something you could do is we could define biomarkers for the individual gene mutations. A biomarker is any sort of measurable thing you can measure in the lab, biologically speaking. So it could be protein levels or gene expression in different organs. It could be a biochemical that's circulating in the blood. But just for abstraction, let's call them biomarkers A, B, or just letters of the alphabet. So if we look at the biomarkers that are unique to people with gene C or D, you might find that it's biomarkers A, B, and C, whereas those with gene E and F, it might be A, C, and D. And so we could go along the hierarchical tree, and then again, just the hierarchical superclasses would be the shared biomarkers shared amongst them. So as you go higher, you get fewer and fewer biomarkers that are shared. So if a patient comes to you that doesn't have a single gene mutation you can find, so unknown genetic etiology, but you look at their biomarkers and they also have A and C, you might want to start them along here, this superclass of A and C. And so they might benefit from pathways of success or technologies or clinical programs that are common to people with genes C, D, E, and F. So this is kind of like a tractable way in which define subclasses based on genes, single genes would still benefit people with unknown genetic etiology. Finally, I want to bring up that therapeutic development for people with individual mutations, such as the 102 autism genes, the therapeutic landscape hasn't ever been more promising than now. And I'll give an example of a drug that was developed a couple of years ago. The drug was called Molassin, and it was developed for a single patient named Mila in 2017-18. So I'll give you the case study. So Mila, at age of 6, came along and was presented with a rapid loss of vision. She lost her ability to move and speak. She had to use an eating tube. And then when they looked at her brain, she was undergoing substantial cerebral atrophy, and she had frequent seizures. And so she was diagnosed with something called Badden's disease, when she was going to die at a very young age. She was brought to Timothy Yu, who whole sequenced her entire genome to find the mutations that might be causing her Badden's disease. And so they actually found the mutation was in a gene called MFSD8. So normally MFSD8 has multiple subparts, which we call in biology exons. And these exons normally are put together to form the final functional gene. However, with Mila's mutation, she had a genetic insertion, which was actually causing an incorrect splicing together the exons. So it was forming a product that was non-functional, a non-functional protein. So what Timothy Yu decided to do was to create a therapeutic specifically for Maya's genetic insertion. He used a technology called antisense oligonucleotides. And what it did in this specific case is that it blocked this inserted genomic element from being recognized by the cell. So it got skipped. And so you essentially were able to get the correct gene to be made. And this was done in record time. Normally, drugs using antisense oligonucleotides are developed over 10 years. But for the case of Mila, given that her prognosis was death, in a short time, the FDA were able to cut the time period down to 1 year. And so they made the diagnosis in 2016, and then they were dosing Mila with the antisense nucleotides in early 2018. So that's actually dramatically improved her prognosis in that she was able to eat again and to sit up on her own and to enjoy stories from her mother. Now, in the case of the 102 autism genes that have been discovered, it's a bit different biology than the case of Mila. In this case, what we have is something called Haploid Sufficiency, where normally any individual will have 2 copies, one from mom, one from dad, of the autism gene. But for the people I'm talking about, they'll have a mutation in one of their copies, which completely disrupts it. And that leaves only 1 good copy around for the cell, whereas neurotypical individuals will have 2 copies throughout the entire lifespan. So essentially they have a dose issue where instead of like a double level, they have a single level. And these autism genes during brain development play very important roles throughout infancy, childhood, adolescence, which you need 2 copies, the proper amount to for the brain to properly develop itself. With which only half the amount, then it's not to form its proper connections together. So just to give a really tiny vignette, a 1-slide vignette into the research I'm doing, we're creating antisense oligonucleotide therapies that are meant to boost the remaining single gene left for the autism individuals and raise it to neurotypical levels. So so essentially, even though they have 1 copy, the ASO treatment will make it so they have the equivalent of 2 copies. And we have different regulatory mechanisms that we can try to target with antisense oligonucleotides to affect this. For example, many autism genes have antisense transcripts that are created, which are meant to inhibit the gene from being expressed. And so if we can essentially disinhibit the gene by disrupting the antisense transcript. There's also a lot of genes that produce non-functional products, wasteful products called nonsense media decay, and we can block that process to rescue them. There's also translation, where different genes can be produced from sort of non-functional translation start sites. So if we block those, then we can increase the protein levels. the important point is that we can try multiple routes in biology to try to as targets for the antisensitive nucleotides to boost the expression of these single genome copies back to neurotypical levels. So I'll just leave you with this. So Milo unfortunately did die 4 years later after again administered with the antisensitive nucleotides therapies, despite that they helped her tremendously. It was probably because her treatment started too late after her disease had caused sort of irreparable damage. She had had a lot of seizures, and she had basically become blind by the time that they were able to administer the antisensitive nucleotide therapies. But with autism cases, especially on the severe end, we have a much longer time window in which to administer therapies. And so the idea is, so the earlier we can get, we can restore the gene levels back to normal, probably the more developed milestones that you can rescue or prevent from getting hurt. So especially with severe autism, there's certain things that happen over time that you'll start to see in the child. I think a lot of parents are familiar with the early infancy regression with language and interactiveness. Even in childhood, sometimes the child can maintain a good deal of activity, but for some individuals, they lose a lot of motor control starting to get into adolescence. And then, especially in adolescence, you might start seeing violent behaviors and the rampant obsessive compulsive disorders that occur too. So the idea is that what might be happening is with only a single copy of the right gene, the brain is fettered in its ability to form these connections that develop from childhood all the way through adolescence. So the sooner we can kind of restore those back to normal biological levels, then it'll unfetter the brain to be able to form those proper connections. Okay, yeah, so that's all I had to share. So I guess I can take any questions.
Yeah, it's all so fascinating. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to open it up to anyone. And you can unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand and I can call on you. Go ahead, Lisa. Oh, I'm going to ask you to unmute. There we go.
I have a son who's severely autistic, and he had just maybe 2 seizures when he's 3 years old. And then last year he started having seizures again, and he's almost 26. So at 25 last year, he had like 13 last year. And then we kind of got him under control of Depakote, creating behaviors, however, the Depakote. So we backed off on the Depakote, and they've just started him on a brand new drug. And I tried to find the name of it, but it's CBD based. And there's a study at UCSD now for 30 males who don't have seizures, just for behaviors. But there was an epilepsy study that it did well. Unfortunately, we started him on Friday and kind of backed off some of the Depakote, and he had a seizure yesterday. So far, not that great on the seizures. But do you know anything about that, that type of application?
Yeah, I'll admit to the ignorance on that. I'm not too familiar with some of the drugs that like the drug trials that are being used. The sort of research I'm doing is really precision medicine that are like targeting. For example, for Mila, she was the only patient that had that specific genetic deficit disorder. So the sort of things that we're trying to create might be for single patients. So there is a question of like how you're going to fund that, but the sort of drugs you're talking about are, I think, more for like larger groups. My mom actually probably knows a lot more about those things if she wants to
Joyce
jump in.
Typing in the chat, Joyce. I welcome you to unmute yourself if you want to talk with Lisa and say anything. She said something epiolex, rather epidiolex.
Epidiolex, right? Is that the new drug? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Right. Well, all of these medications are trial and error thing. They're not like what Stephen's proposing with to address a specific deficit or a specific biochemical pathway. It's a general hope to try and use the cannabinoid receptors to help in general with reducing excess kind of renegade neurochemical transmission that occurs in seizures. So it's just one of those things that will take time and patience to sort out and see if it will be a benefit to your son. So, you know, we'll all pray that it does work for him.
Can I say something? I'm Christy, and my daughter had severe epilepsy. And we just discovered Epidiolex the November of just before the pandemic. And it changed her behavior. It changed her seizure pattern. It was remarkable. After 40 years of severe autism, she had Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and could not be controlled for long periods of time, and the medicine would wear off. But Epidiolex made a difference. And unfortunately, we got it too late. She passed away with a seizure 3 years ago. But we did have 6 months, and I saw the difference. I mean, I was startled by what it would do for one person.
Did you see a difference behaviorally?
Yes, I did. She was no longer violent. She was no longer moody, no longer temperamental, no longer violent. She's totally relaxed.
Wow.
And we had the 6 months of the joy. And then she did have a seizure. And passed away.
So it didn't stop the seizures.
No,
Did
it
it
didn't, but
reduce
they
them?
were less, and they were less severe, less
Mhm.
often and less severe. But the last was an accident. She had a seizure in the bathroom and fell and hit her head on the wall and
Yeah.
slumped down,
So-
and they couldn't revive her.
I'm sorry. It's the falls. I know he's had a lot
Exactly, and I didn't know that. I thought it would always be the seizure.
of that.
And we did it for 44 years, but the best 6 months of our life was with Epidiolex.
Well, thank you very much for that information. He just started it Friday, and already he lives in a group home. They've already said they see a big difference.
I did also, Lisa. It was outstanding. I mean, we were all floating, and then we were shocked when
Oh,
it ended in March. But I praise it 100%. And I
okay,
only
thank
heard
you.
about it from my psychiatrist. I was talking about the pressures of raising an epileptic child, and he got on the phone right in the middle of our meeting, and he called his brother, who was a neurologist, and he said, "What did you just tell me about that drug yesterday?" And he said, "The FDA just passed Epidiolex, and I got it. It was $45,000 a year. She was in a group home. They approved it,
Yep.
and it was wonderful."
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm
That is
glad-
the best.
glad I could help.
I mean, I'm so beside myself, as you can well imagine. And the Depakote just makes him have behaviors, but it stops
Yes.
the seizures. So, I mean, I've just been going back and forth.
It's a juggling match. I know what you're living through, Lisa. It was just incredible on all of us. Luckily, my greatest help was my daughter, who was a paramedic. So Carolyn and I raised this child, and she would have passed away by 35, but she made it to 44.
Thank you very much.
And Lisa, it's never all one or the other. It's not, all or nothing. Often
Right.
Yeah.
combinations are helpful, and it's, you don't just stop one and start another. You start another. If one is helping, you should start adding the other to see if you get better seizure control. If
Right.
you do, then you start decreasing very, very gradually the
Right.
other. And it's an art and a patient dance to try and
Right.
figure out the optimal balance.
Right. Totally right,
hear you.
Joyce. That's what we did at the end. She was just gradually titrating, and there was such a difference.
Well, I'm very hopeful. Thank you. Even though I am right now trying to get his Depakote back. Anyway, because he can't
Right.
keep falling down. He's already
Right.
broken his nose twice and split
Right.
his head open. And,
Right. She had a helmet because she fell so often.
Mm.
Right.
Well, it was meant for you all to meet today.
Yes,
It was.
very helpful.
I'm surprised.
Thank you.
I just wanted to hear Dr. Tran be brilliant, and I didn't know I would talk.
I so appreciate it. But I have to actually go and meet my his doctor on something else. So I'm leaving a little early. Thank you so much. This has been so
Good luck,
beneficial. I
Lisa.
appreciate all
Take
of you.
care.
Thank you, Lisa.
Lisa,
Thank you, Dana.
great seeing you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. Thank you for so much for sharing all of that, Christy.
Oh, I didn't expect to do that. I didn't see any similarity between that and autism, but
It'll help.
there is that one component, the seizures,
Mhm.
right?
Steve, I have a curious question. I'm just wondering, you were saying that there are certain pathways that are where just in your typical people, there's certain pathways where the female brains produce more protein than, or neurotransmitters than male pathways. Can you elaborate on that? Like what are these pathways producing? How many are there? And does that explain some of the differences you see between the way males and females think?
Yeah, I'll admit the study was, the 2016 study was more generic. That is, they didn't have really sample sizes to get into, and this is something that's improving with these studies, is with higher sample sizes, you can get more narrow down to which exact pathways. But this one had only a couple dozen males and female brains. And so they were really generic terms, as in general synaptic and ion channel pathways. So they weren't specific like dopaminergic or, which circuit in the brain. It didn't get down to that level. It was the general, ontology, say versus gastrointestinal, say versus reproductive pathways. So it was specifically, or immune related pathways, which is another thing that you find across autism patients are dysregulated. But this one was just specifically the synaptic ones, but in the general sense of the word. So without getting into any specific, circuit.
Was that in post pubertal individuals that it was studied, or pre?
Good question. Let me see if I can recall that. I actually don't recall. I know it included mostly adults though. If I recall, I think it was mostly adults.
Ben has his hand up. Go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm curious to hear about like how the mapping is coming along, because it's been a while. I know that 102 different genes have been identified related to autism, and then the combinations. I wonder if there's any patterns of combinations that are emerging, or where the research is at in looking at those patterns of combinations.
Yeah, I haven't really been seeing. I think that one of the difficulties has been trying to collect people with the same mutations into one place and finding like an expert clinician that, I guess, first of all has interest, but and the wherewithal to be able to. So this is actually an important thing. Is what I was kind of laying out was more of a vision, and there's the major logistical challenges with this. The first being, like what I said, just how do you, first of all, the instance of any one of these genetic disorders is pretty rare on a single level. So you might only get 10 or fewer patients that were in our original cohort that had it. And so they're probably all around the country. So how you get them, or how we are able to find a way that we can share information in a meaningful way is something logistically has to be set up. And it's going to involve a very sophisticated collaboration between researchers and then the primary caregivers and the teachers and educators that are involved with the individual patients. As far as I'm aware, that hasn't really been developed in a sophisticated way. The Safari Foundation has been trying to create a individual, I think it's called the Spotlight or Searchlight, in which they're trying to find ways to connect people with the same genetic deficit together. I haven't heard though how well that's going. I think it's still at its nascent stages, is I think.
Good question. Thanks, Ben. Violet, thanks, Violet, for joining. Or Joyce, I'm so sorry. Did you want to chime in for that?
I just wanted to ask about the biomarkers. Like, how would you find the biomarkers associated with specific genetic?
Right. It's the same problem in that you would have to get all those patients together, and they'd have to be willing to share certain biopsy samples. So, for example, they're willing to share fiber of skin or blood. Then we could create induced pluripotent stem cells from those and start to study difference in, let's say, expression of certain markers versus control populations will be one way. Or if there's a sophisticated program which they're all going to similar clinical programs that collect blood samples, then you can measure certain chemicals in the bloodstream and see if that differs between neurotypical populations. Of course, none of that has really been developed, any of those programs yet.
It sounds like you're saying that it would actually be easier to look at other biomarkers than mapping the genes, and like looking at the gene combinations is really maybe the biomarkers.
Well, in fairness to the people who do the sort of the lumping, where they lump all autism, this is probably the reason they do that, is because it's just way more tractable to get the sample sizes you need to do any given study. And they have been making good progress on it. It's just a hope for the future that someday we could focus on the individual genes and then move up from there, go in that direction. But yeah, it's truly a challenge to know how to develop the architecture for that.
Thank you. Ben, I'm so curious about your background. How did you find Autism Tree?
I've been around for a while. I'm a psychologist. I have a practice in the Pasadena area, and I'm friends with a couple of people who spoke at the neuroscience conference right before the pandemic. So I was there, and friends with Darlene Hansen and with Liz Torres. So Liz is working on biomarker stuff, of course. And I'm really interested in incorporating the science into our practice as soon as possible. We have some pretty good venture capital connections and connections with insurance companies. So I feel like I'm constantly looking for opportunities to find where we can implement the science into our practice, because I think that we can pull together the resources over the next handful of years to be able to do it where there's realistic opportunities. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
Just made this conversation much more meaningful. Violet, we're almost up at time. And if anybody has any additional questions for Stephen, you can always email it to me, and I can forward it to him, and we can send it out in the recap email that'll go out this Friday. I think this comment from Violet, who's one of our moms, is the perfect way to end this. She said, super informative presentation. I'm a mom with a recently diagnosed 8-year-old. She's considered high functioning, but struggles a lot with separation anxiety and social skills. It's very hard to get any services at school because she's doing well academically and does well inside the classroom because it's a controlled environment. However, she struggles a lot when recess or lunchtime because it's unstructured. This presentation is eye-opening. I understand more now how ASD can differ so much from one child to another. My child had an EGG and didn't show seizures, but her brain waves were abnormal when waking up from the study. The doctor wants to do exfragile, but they'll need to sedate her under general anesthesia for 90 minutes due to other tests needed as well. 90 minutes under come with a risk. So I've been postponing it, but I can see how important it can be to know more about genes. Sorry for the long comment, but I'm very thankful for it, to the speaker, and very grateful for HPF. So thank you, Violet. And thank you, Stephen, for coming on and explaining to us the really important work that you're doing, and your vision as well for what you're proposing for the future and how we should deal with everything on this topic. So thank you.
Yeah, if anybody wants to get in contact, like Ben or anybody else, then yeah, maybe we can share my email with everyone who attended. Would be good.
Great. Yeah, I'll include it in the recap.
Violet, I hope that I see you more here. Everything you said about your child reminds me of when my son was diagnosed. Exactly, like the recess and lunchtime was so very, very challenging. And as a parent, I would just, continue to be really diligent related to, the testing that you do. And I know I went through all that when my child was really young, and I think every mom has to just keep their eye, be the chief officer for each child, because every child, as you've really shown so beautifully, Stephen, is so unique, and so I feel like it's really important. Every little detail you said about your child is so important. So I'm glad you shared it. It made me see how far that I've come with my son, who's now 22, Violet. It's a journey. And I think Dr. Joyce Show would say the same thing. I don't know if you want to share anything at all, Joyce, with this mom, but my heart just went out to you, Violet, that I know that's a lot what you shared, but you are so not alone. It literally made me think back to the early days with my own son. And I just wanted to give you extra love and gratitude for the diligent mom that you're being to your child.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I really appreciate all that you guys do. Like I said on the comment, I'm new to all of this, but I'm learning a lot as I go. So it really helps me to hear from other people that have been going or are going through the same things. It's been hard with the school, like I said, because she's high functioning, and they tell me that they don't see a lot of things that I see at home, but she does struggle a lot during recess and lunchtime. So all of this helps me a lot, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for your words. I appreciate them.
Violet, when someone has so much going for her, like your daughter does, there's so much hope. And if you will look up Michelle Garcia Weiner, she's a very good resource for a child that you were describing. And you can go through some of her workbooks yourself in terms of developing social skills if the school won't listen or doesn't have a wider program that your child can join. And you should also be looking up other organizations that for high functioning children who are like your child to form social groups. There's also a possibility that your school or district has inclusion specialists, which would be perfect for you to advocate for involving in your child's case, for helping her through recess and lunchtime. So there are just some ideas, and good luck to you, but it sounds like she has a good prognosis, especially with a loving and understanding mom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your words. Could you repeat the name of the person that you said, Michelle Garcia?
We can we'll include it, Violet, if that's okay with you, Stephen. We'll include it at the end of what we share out with Stephen's Lunch and Learn today. We'll put a link.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Everybody turn on their camera if you would. We always do a group picture to share our excitement for this 80th Lunch and Learn. We're all building this community together, and we value each Lunch and Learn incredibly.
I'll do it.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, it's so great to see everyone's faces. Okay. Big smiles. Ready? 3, 2, 1, cheese. I got it.
Thank you. Hope to see you next Wednesday. Thank you so much, Stephen Tran. You're amazing.
Thank you all. It was wonderful.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing it. Bye-bye.